Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to TSS. We are very happy. Today is Father's Day. Hey! Happy Father's Day to all fathers present here today, to all fathers to be one day, to all fathers that are more than father once, the grandfathers, right, Paul? And to all fathers to be soon, Joe. Grandfathers to be soon. Grandfathers. Anyway, it's a special day, and especially to all the ones that are already who gave us life, but they are no longer here with us. They are in the spiritual world. May all receive our love and our gratitude for the opportunity for us to be here today, embracing this beautiful life. Today is going to be a special day. Marcos Diclei will be giving us the lecture. We're still in the month of Paul of Tarsus, and today he will be talking about the Epistles of Timothy. And we are going to have a reading from Maria Lucia, and the prayer is going to be from Maria Lucia as well. Good. Thank you so much, and welcome to our viewers too.
Good morning. The prayer is from the book The Way, the Truth, and the Life by the Spirit of Emmanuel, and it's about the youthfulness. Flee the desire of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord with a pure heart. Paul, Timothy 2:2. Those who are involved with young people usually assign them so much power that they end up misguided, deceived, and careless. Too much is expected of them. We agree that young people do have incredible potential, but we need to remember that this phase of earthly existence is the one that requires the most guidance. Young people can and will do a lot if older and more experienced persons do not withhold their help in the work to be done. Young people cannot build anything new if they do not use the efforts of those who preceded them. In everything they do, they rely on their predecessors. Youth can be compared to the promising departure of a ship on an important voyage. Childhood was the preparation for it, and old age will be the arrival in the port. Every phase of this trip requires lessons from experienced sailors to learn how to organize and finish it successfully. It is crucial to support the mentality of the young appropriately. However, no one should offer them promises or illusory power. The desire of most young people do not always represent a future safe harbor. Young people may be able to do a lot, but in everything they should pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord with a pure heart. Let's close our eyes and take a deep breath so we can calm down our thoughts, our mind, and connected our hearts to the hearts of the Spirit's mentors who are here to enlighten us during this study. Let's ask Jesus the blessing to learn a little bit more so we can proceed in our journey towards the harbor of peace and true love. May Jesus and the Spirit's mentors of this activity enlighten all of us and the speakers, Marcos, so we can have a clear mind and open heart to absorb all the teachings and bring them with us during this week so we can apply them and make our lives and our neighbors' lives happier. We thank you for this opportunity, Jesus, to be here today. Bless us all, and so be it.
Thank you, Maria Lucia. Thank you, Sandra. Good morning, everyone. Welcome everyone who is watching us through the internet. I have two pages from my lecture today, and I found another one here. Yeah, so happy Father's Day to everyone. So I didn't forget about it. Happy Father's Day. And coincidentally or not, when we talk about the epistles of Timothy, it feels like a letter of a father to his son, because Paul actually considered Timothy as his spiritual son, and he made references to Timothy in several places, in several of his epistles, as his beloved son. Right? Obviously, it was not his son, but he spiritually adopted Timothy as his son. So what we are going to do together in these brief minutes, and I promise to be brief, we will go through this a few passages of these two letters to understand a bit better. And I watched a snippet of Marcio's lecture from last week, and he was talking about his experience in studying the Bible, studying the gospel. And sometimes it's difficult for us, right? If we get into it without a context. And I didn't cheat a lot at school when I was a teenager or children, but I learned to cheat in a good way after I grew up. So I cheated, and I consulted our older brother Emmanuel on this fantastic book, Paul and Stephen. And I was actually able to understand a lot of the context behind these two letters that Paul wrote to Timothy, right? Where he met Timothy, when, in which circumstances, why he wrote to Timothy the first letter, and what was actually the circumstances of when he wrote the second letter. And then we can understand why he wrote what he wrote. So when we grow up, we shouldn't be afraid of cheating, if it's a good cheating. Not at the school, obviously. So that's what we are going to discuss and know a little bit more about Timothy, right? When we think about the apostles, the disciples, how do we imagine them? Young, cool guys, funny guys, old man with a long white beard, long hair, right? That's how we imagine them. And I actually had a big surprise when I got to know who was Timothy. So let's get into it. This is obviously a representation of Paul of Tarsus from the Bible series. If one of you or some of you never watched that series, it's amazing. It's a great representation, modern, recent representation of what happened at the time of Jesus, right? So this is the actor representing Paul, and just brought it here to illustrate and talk about that. But where does the Timothy fits with the whole Bible and the Gospel. So we saw this in the past. This is the Old Testament plus the New Testament, all the books and letters written. So we can see in green over here all the letters that Paul wrote, about 13 of them. So we are only touching quickly 2 of them today. But it's a lot of content. And once we give the time to read and digest, it's really an amazing journey. It's an inner journey, right? So much important that Emmanuel, who was the spiritual guide, the mentor of Chico Xavier, he wrote Chico Psychographics, several books, where Emmanuel picked a single verse and described an entire lesson out of that verse. So Maria Lucia just read from one of the books here, The Way, the Truth, and the Light, where Emmanuel picked one little verse from Timothy about youth, right, and described about it, the importance and how critical is the time of childhood and youth. And I purposely picked that because he was writing to a young man. That's why that lesson talks about youth, right? He was talking to Timothy, who was a young man, but it's very applicable to all of us. There are some very young faces here, and there are some other faces like mine who have been younger for a longer time than others. So it's still applicable to us, right? All those lessons. So it started to give us some context. Now, I brought a new tool. We are investing in some technology in TSS, so I brought our time machine GPS, right? To understand where have they met, where did they met, and why. So this map here, everything you see is actually the places where Paul went. There were no cars, no planes, actually by foot. At most, a boat, a canoe or a ship in those long journeys, obviously. But it is estimating about between 4,000 to 6,000 kilometers of work, right? And in one of these trips, and poor Paul, right, Jesus warned him at the very beginning. And when he, at the road of Damascus, right, he got blind and met Jesus and asked Jesus, Master, what do you want me to do? And Jesus told him to go to Damascus and met Ananias, a man over there. But he said, your life is going to be very difficult. Get ready for it. And in every single places that you see, every single city, or he was in prison, or he was stoned, or even considered dead. So he was beaten almost near to discarnate. It was a tough scenario. So right before he met Timothy, he was in a city. You gotta use our GPS here. He met Timothy in Lystra, but he was in a city called Iconium. There you go. So he went to Iconium, and he used to go to city by city to preach the gospel. And his hope and his goal was to found a church, not the churches that we know today, right? If you go to the dictionary, you understand what is church. It's a group of people who gather together for an objective, like us, right? So he wanted to form a place where people would study and preach and nourish the gospel. So every city, he would meet some people, and they would have interested by the scriptures, by the gospel, and they would form a church in their homes. So they would do like the gospel at home every day, every week. So he would consider that we have a church in Ephesus, in Corinthus. That's how it worked. So he went to the city Iconium, and he was preaching the gospel over there. He cured a few people, and I said poor Paul because a lady, a very young lady, came to him and said, Paul, I love you. And she was about to get married. So I don't wanna get married anymore. And she told her fiancé, and her fiancé immediately spread to the community that Paul was a sorcerer, and he was there to abuse from the simple, from the poor, and immediately they stoned him, and he had to left right? And so very difficult situation, and we can see the inferior spirits creating problem for Paul every single step of the way. Reminded us of what Susanna discussed here a couple of weeks ago, right, with us. So he left the city and said, where do we go? So he formed a group of Christians in Iconium, and especially in a home of a man called Onesiphorus. And Onesiphorus had a sister, a widow sister, in the city of Lystra. And he said, why don't you go to her house? Here's a letter. Tell that you know me, and I recommend you to spend some time over there until things get quiet again. And then you can continue. So he went to Lystra. And there he met Eunice, who was his sister, and Lloyd was her mother. And they received him as a brother because of the introduction of her own brother, right? So they were very happy. They were very religious. They were Jewish, very religious people. And they felt an unexplainable affinity with Paul. And Paul and Barnabas, who was his companion through all his journeys, right? So they both went there. And Eunice had a son, Timothy. And he was 13 years old. Here we have a disciple of Paul with 13 years old, not with a wide, long beard as we imagine, right? So it was impressive. So his father passed away for some reason a long time, and he also felt a great affinity for Paul. He was a very smart young man with a very good heart on Emmanuel's word. And then the first night that they stayed in their homes, it feels like our gospel home. Timothy went there, took the scriptures of the Old Testament and sat with his mother and his grandmother, and he started to read about it. And they commented, they discussed about it afterwards, all of them. And then they invited Paul, do you want to say something? And for the first time, Paul brought the figure of Jesus for them, which was new, right? And they were impressed. They were in total silence and amazed, the three of them, but especially the young Timothy, to the point that Emmanuel said Paul had to tap on his head a couple times to see if he was awake. It's written there. And I saw that so interesting. He was like focused, right? This is what I was looking for. It reminds some of us when we read the Spiritist book for the first time, probably. And from that on, Paul spent the next 3 days in their house, resting physically from the struggles and discussing about the gospel, teaching all of them, and they were absorbing everything. He had several conversations with Timothy privately, according to Emmanuel. So, after those 3 days, they went to meet the locals. They went to the square and talked to people and preached the gospel as Paul and Barnabas used to do everywhere. And they started to heal the sick, as they often did, right? Because of the different culture at the time, they thought that Paul and Barnabas were Jupiter and Mercury, the Roman gods. And immediately, oh, they are gods, and they started to carry them. And Paul said, no, stop, we are not gods. We are just servants. And people thought a bit strange. So they went to consult with the people from Iconium. Who is this man that came to my city? Oh, he abused from a lady and this and this and this. Guess what? They came back. They went at Eunice's house, pulled Paul out, and stoned him and beat him. And there was one person, because Paul cured his mother, he wanted to help. Timothy went to him and said, please help, otherwise they'll kill him. I said, wait a minute, I will give you a hand. So he was a strong man and the community respected him. So he jumped into it and told everyone, I'll take care of it. He is already beaten to death. Let's throw his body in the garbage, in the dump, outside of the city. So he took his body, throw it over there, and he arranged for Timothy to be there with water to help him. So he almost passed away, he almost discarnated. And Barnabas was very sick as well. That was their routine, actually, right? So this is the scenario where he met Timothy for the first time, and he planted the seed of the gospel in that city, especially on Timothy's heart. So that was his first time he's passed it through the city, and we can see that he often passed it there. Every time that he traveled, he would pass through Lystra several times to see Eunice, Lois, and obviously Timothy. In his second journey, second time he passed through the city, he invited Timothy to follow him, and he accepted in the blink of an eye. Timothy was often his representative when he could not travel to distant churches. He would write a letter and say, Timothy, go. That's why in several passages we can see, I send you my son Timothy to bring you great news, and this word of cautious or something he wanted to write, right? He was at the forefront. His right arm, as we used to say. And Emmanuel said they were very, very close to the point that Paul used to reference Timothy as his beloved son, right? So that's a little bit about the background on Timothy, right? So now let's dive a little bit into the letters and a little bit of context on the letters. What was happening actually on the first letter? When Paul was in prison 2 times. If you read this book, as I mentioned, Paul and Stephen, you see the details of it, right? It's an amazing book. He was in prison twice by the Roman authorities in Rome. And when he left, he was released for the first time. He decided to do a tour across all the cities again. And once he passed through Ephesus, is that Ephesus or Corinth? Let me see here. Ephesus. Because of the distance sometimes, the churches or the Christians, they would change directions slightly. As all of us, right? We see the guidelines, we see the scriptures, we learn, but after a while, we started to make things a bit more flexible. If you remember St. Francis of Assisi, right? Once he defined the rules, the norms of conduct for his group of followers, and left to the Holy Land, tried to stop the war. It took months for him to come back. When he came back, things were all different. There was a hierarchy, right? There were things that, in his point of view, they were not core. They were a distraction from the practice of the gospel, the true charity, the true love. So when Paul passed through Ephesus, he saw the same thing. He saw people extremely concerned with materialism. He saw people changing the meaning of the words of Jesus for self-interest. There was a lot of abuse from that perspective to influence and manipulate people. Disorder and false doctrine, most of all, right? And we see that a lot nowadays, right? Historically, see the Crusades, what we have done in the name of God, in the name of Jesus. So those are the things that he started to see it. So he said, I cannot pass through Ephesus and move on. So he decided to give Timothy his first major assignment. He said, you are going to stay here and clean up all this mess and be my representative here. So he moved on to the region of Macedonia, leaving Timothy in Ephesus, and then he moved on to the Macedonian region. There's no precise location where he is, in Philippus or Thessalonica, but that's where he went. And after a few months, concerned about Timothy because of his young age, imagine to put a Christian groupament at that time with all the authorities and persecution. It was not a persecution at the climax yet, but it was a harsh terrain for Christians, right? He left Timothy with his maybe 14 years old Would we dare to do that? We don't have the discernment, obviously, to look at 13-year-old like Paul had, right? But that's when he wrote the first letter, to give him some encouragement, but also some advice. Paul was very experienced, right? And Timothy has the goodwill, the desire, the love, the true, sincere willingness to serve, but he didn't have that experience. So that's why he wrote. So that helps us to understand why we see so many recommendations and guidelines written in those two letters. And that's why we really enjoy reading these two letters, because it's applicable to us a lot. Not only at the churches, but anywhere in life. It's very, a strict set of recommendations, suggestions, words of advice that we are going to see. And a word of caution for all of us, if this is the first time we're reading this, Paul and Emmanuel, they have been very close, more than what we can think of, right? In the book that some of you are reading, actually, 2,000 years ago, there is an encounter of them. It's not in the book, but just before Pubulentus or Emmanuel discarnate, they have an encounter over there. It's not by accident that we have so many books from Emmanuel studying the works of Paul, right? But if you know a little bit of Emmanuel, starting by his first 3 prerequisites for Chico Xavier to work with him: discipline, and then a little bit more discipline, and then a little bit more discipline, just in case you didn't hear me, right? So when we read Paul, it's no different. It's no different. It's the same discipline. And some of us and some scholars, they don't understand it, and we start to extrapolate things. That's why it's good cheating with Emmanuel, because he gives us the behind the scenes that we don't have anywhere else, right? But he was a very disciplined man, rigorous, and that's what he asks from Timothy. And that's what he asks from all of us. Because without discipline, we are very vulnerable to make mistakes. That's actually the reality. So I'm not going to extend on each letter, but I picked 5 lessons for it for us to meditate quickly. And then if any of you want to bring something up for discussions, anyone on the internet who want to make a little comment, feel free to do so. Okay. So this is actually the first one. See, First Timothy, which means the first letter, the first epistle from Paul to Timothy. I used to think that because the book has the name of Timothy, Timothy wrote it. No, he was the receiver of the letter. So Paul said, "Do not let people look down on you because you were young." That explains he's 13, 14 years old, right? "But set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity." Set the example. Is that easy for us to set the example? It's very difficult, right? Because we are not perfect. So we can see...
So it's do let. You said do not let.
Oh, that's right. It's do not let. I ate here. Do not let people look down on you. Thank you. So let's talk about setting the example, right? It's very difficult, especially if you're a younger person. Can you imagine you get into a group of, scholars, doctors of the law, and all of a sudden you're talking about things that go against what they have been preaching for years, for generations, right? They will say, "Get out of here." And Paul was strict with him. Do not let people look you down because you're young, but set the example, right? And setting the example is way more powerful than any dialogue, right? And this is not for the churches only. This is for everywhere. And we will see in another passage, right? Everywhere, whenever we are, if we don't like the way people treat us, how do we respond to that? Yeah, we can express how do we feel, but most importantly, treat them the way you want them to treat you. And it's not going to change anything actually tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, it's not going to change anything. Next week, it may not change anything.
Few incarnations.
A few incarnations maybe, that will change, right? Especially we're talking about youth, we're talking about Father's Day here, especially for children. Do you want to give them a moral basis and education? You can tell them, but if they see you doing something else, they saw you doing that. Honey, don't smoke, okay? It's bad for you. That's the easy thing, is smoking. But there's worse things, right? Criticizing behind others, gossiping, right? Breaking the rules, stealing. If you say, don't do those things, but you do it, they're not going to learn. It's setting the example. It's one of the key things that Jesus asked us, right? And he himself, he could have come in just being a preacher, but he chose not to do it. He actually lived every single word that he preached to us. He lived until the extreme where people killed him, and he didn't register any offense at all. He loved, right? That's the example that Paul asks Timothy to do, because that's the core of a Christian. Any comments or questions for anyone?
Yeah, I think that this is all about respect, right? I think that the young, they don't like to be looked down. Nobody does.
Yeah.
But Paul says, if you really don't want that to happen, you have to make yourself into a person that's respected by everyone. You don't have a right to respect, you have to earn the respect. And you earn the respect through how you behave, how you talk, and how you demonstrate your true Christian values.
Because they can look you down, they can criticize you, but your actions don't match with that criticism, right? Like Chico Xavier said, right? If they're criticizing you, evaluate. Does it make sense? Okay, so change something. Is that a lie? Yes. So why bother? It's a lie. Garbage. Right? So that's the core of this teaching, actually. Let's take a look at another one. Do not neglect your gift. Now I got the not correct. Joe, I knew it. Do not neglect your...
You got for both.
Yeah, accumulating, right? Do not neglect your gift which was given to you through prophecy. So there were connections between two passages about the prophecy that Paul received about Timothy, and not going into that details, but this is very strong for us, right? Do not neglect your gift. And we often think about spiritual gift as mediumship. And Emmanuel actually elaborated on one of the lessons quite a bit on this, that we all expect to develop some certain types of mediumship, because we think about being medium puts us in a different position than others. It's special, or we are curious about it, to see the Spirit, hear the Spirit. And Emmanuel said, this is nothing to do with our moral evolution or condition, and we should not be eager for mediumship, right? Things will come in the right moment for the right reason. So if we don't have a developed mediumship, we should be happy with the mediumship that we all have, which is, anyone knows what's the mediumship that we all have? Intuition, exactly. That day that we wake up and say, you know what, I think I'm going to call that person for some reason, or don't think I'm going to the office driving today yet, I'll take the train. So sometimes our guardian angels, the spirituality speaks with us. And we got that thought, and we often think, how smart I am. I avoided getting to that plane. The plane crashed, and here I am. I'm so smart, sometimes I am impressed with myself. Yeah. So we forget that our guardian angel sometimes, my friend, it's not your day. Change your plans, or they find a way to hold us behind, and then we think it's lucky. We think it's luck, but it's not, right? So the intuition is the mediumship that we all have. We shouldn't be eager. That's not the gift that Paul is talking about here. The gift that Paul is talking about here is the opportunity to serve. As André Luiz said, the clock of the Christian doesn't click as tick tock. It's serve. Serve. Probably has a better sound than my voice. But that's what he's talking about, the gift of service. And we can serve wherever we are. And we don't need special mediumship for that. The only mediumship that we need is love. Serve by serving, not serving by showing up and being disputing with each other, competing, right? The only competition, actually, that Emmanuel says, and we discussed about a couple lectures ago, was the competition to know who serves more for the interest of serving. That's all, right? So another very important advice to Timothy, who was starting his journey. That's all of us as well.
One thing that I like to do is take some of the way that things are phrased by traditional Christianism and kind of reword them according to Spiritism.
Yes.
So in Spiritism, we do not see gifts, we see missions, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
So do not neglect your mission, which was not given to you, but accepted by you.
Yeah. Very,
so this
very
is
good.
A mission that was accepted by you.
Yeah.
And don't forget about it. That's what Paul is trying to tell Timothy here.
Yeah.
If you're doing this, it's because there is a reason. The reason was not, as they thought, to be a prophecy, but a bigger plan.
Yeah.
And Timothy was an agent of that plan, and he accepted that mission.
Yep.
Sometimes we forget the mission that we have accepted because we are weak, we falter.
Yeah.
He's giving them encouragement, especially when you're young, to realize that you come for a reason here.
And that's why when we read these letters, it really feels that it's for every single one of us. Because that mission, that commitment, we all have done. We're not here for granted by accident. Right? We all had a reincarnatory planning, which is something that we also had a lecture about it here. And we are here to serve. Right? Very good point, Joe. Thank you. So here's another interesting word of advice that applies for all of us. Therefore, I want men, which means men and women, you are not excused, everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. So it's not the empty faith that stays in the knees, just praying. Right? That's not what he meant, but having our words in actions everywhere. If you are a teacher, if you work in a bank, if you clean houses, if you clean the street, wherever is our profession, we should lift up holy hands in appreciations for the mission that we have. Right? Understanding that the place that we are is the experience that we need. In every single challenge that we face, or every single success that we are able to accomplish, we lift our hearts to God in appreciation. And this is so hard, because when good things happen, we forget about God. And when bad things happen, we rebel against God. Right? So that's exactly what he's saying. And especially, do not do this only within the church or within the Spirit Center. We do that very well, right? Well, kind of, bro. We treat each other well. We speak in a more sweet voice. But when we go back home, we transform completely, as if being a Christian would be something that we would do Sundays from 11 to 12, right? That's exactly what he's telling him. It's the opposite. Right, very important for us. And we used to say at our mediumistic meetings that we are mediums 24/7, right? We are Christians 24/7. You don't need to preach the gospel to your boss on Monday morning, obviously, when you have your checkpoint meetings with him. But if you feel there's a need, you can mentally do a little prayer, or if you can think about how is a Christian way to respond maybe to a criticism or to something else. Right? We are Christians everywhere. Disputing, it's something, it was very wise of Paul to bring here anger and disputing, because it's natural. If you all remember some of the passages of Jesus and the disciples, right? When they were traveling and they were in the background trying to understand who is the biggest among us. right? Who is the favorite with Jesus? That's our pride, right? There's disputes. In every single group of people, there's always disputes. And Jesus comes and says, do you want to know who is the biggest? Is actually the one who makes himself or herself the smallest, tiniest, the one who serves the most. And that's very hard, right? So he brought this up to Timothy right at the beginning, right? So be the smallest, don't get into disputes, and serve and focus on your work everywhere. It's very applicable to all of us. Another one here, I think this is the last for this first letter. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. What is it trying to address here? Which problem from the church is trying to address here? Materialism, right? People were getting stuck because they were saying, I cannot help because we don't have money. Or I cannot give because I have my family, right? Thoughts that we often have. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but just close this saying, we don't need money to serve. We don't need money to practice charity. Sometimes listening is charity. Sometimes a smile is charity, right? Sometimes calling someone and ask if they need something. Maybe a visit. A prayer is charity. So if we wait for the Lotto 649 to do charity, we are going to discarnate waiting for it, right? So it's not going to happen. So I won't extend too much, but that's one of the problems that Paul wanted to address, and he gives several recommendations for Timothy here. Okay. This is a common theme for Paul, the fight, right? Fight the good fight of the faith, not the fight of the world, right? The fight that the disciples, especially Judas, expected Jesus to do, right? He expected Jesus to get the sword and kill everyone and put them on their places. He said, no, that's not my fight. My fight is against materialism, selfishness, pride, injustice, right? He came to love. That's the good fight that Paul's described internally. The fight that every single one of us have when we started to think about Jesus with a little bit more care. We started to think about our inner transformation. We all have that fight. If we did not encounter that fight with what we should do, with what we still want to do, we still didn't understand the message yet. Because the struggle actually starts when we start to accept and understand the Christian message, right? So that's the fight of the good fight of the faith. So the second, just to wrap up, the second context was actually another topic that I encountered on Paul and Stephen. You may remember the fact that Nero threw fire in Rome, and he just thought, oh, let's put fire on this couple of blocks, and then we tell they were the Christians, and then we kill them all to make them pay. And he forgot that, fire has some different properties and spread to the whole city. It was big trouble, right? Even his backyard probably ended up burning. But that's the time when Paul was imprisoned, right? The persecutions of the Christians started to get into the climax. And he was imprisoned again. And obviously as a Roman citizen, he was released and given temporary prison. He could stay around. There were guards following every single step of Paul because he was a dangerous man. When he met Nero, Nero could not do much with him because he was so wise in his comments that he wouldn't allow any of his politicians and direct reports to talk to him like that. He was very wise using the knowledge of the Roman law and the knowledge, of the Judaism and the law of that time as well. So that's the place where it happens. Paul went to a very humble and simple house from two of Christians at that time, Linus and Claudia, and they were actually about to leave in a trip. So before they left in a trip, he decided to write. He was obviously in Rome. He decided to write another letter to Timothy, right, at that time, and he would give it to the two of them, and they would travel and deliver the letter to Timothy. It was a very tough time for him because he saw the Christians being persecuted. He was beaten up again. He was already very old, very weak. He describes in his letter his sadness because he wanted to do more, but he felt defeated by age. Due to persecution, everybody pretty much left. Reminds us of someone, right? He only have on his side Luke. Yeah, Luke was the only one of the disciples that remained with him. As a doctor, he used to take care of Paul during his journeys, but everybody else, they left afraid of the persecutions, or such as Simon Peter at that time, he has missions in other churches. But it was a sad time for him because of that. And he wrote this letter, as Emmanuel describes, bless you, really wiping a lot, because he felt, and he also received intuition, obviously, that his time has come. That he only had a couple of maybe weeks to leave. And actually, after he wrote this letter, he was imprisoned and murdered 3 weeks after. So this letter, the second letter of Timothy, was actually the last letter that Paul wrote before he discarnated, murdered by a soldier. He wasn't sent to the circles as the other Christians, to the lions. He was actually, because of his arguments, Nero had to do it behind the scenes. He got a group of soldiers that went just after the midnight, took him out of his cell, took him to the woods and murdered him. It was really under wraps, actually. So he describes, this is, one of his comments that express the sadness that he was feeling in the context. We can see that by the whole context as well. The only, actually, something I forgot to say, that this letter only survived. Linus and Claudia were actually imprisoned as well. And the soldiers get to their house to arrest Paul and everybody else very suddenly, right, at night. So this letter only survived because of Luke, that he didn't sleep in the house at night, and Paul had the letters with him. And then he actually was the one who escaped and traveled and delivered the letters, and a couple of others, I think, as well, other scriptures. So it was very down to the wire that this letter escaped, actually. So he was asking Timothy to come and visit him because he was feeling alone. He gave several recommendations to Timothy. He still had hope to have some time to see him one last time. So here are some of the things that he writes to Timothy at the very end. Join with me in suffering like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but rather tries to please his commander office. A lot of discipline here, right? Using the soldiers in the army, which is an organization based on discipline. So we can see when I talk about being very close to Emmanuel and his thoughts on discipline, we can see that. And the main message here is join me in suffering. And that's what the message from Jesus to all of us. You want to follow me? Be ready, because it's a narrow door. People don't wanna follow me because it's difficult. And that's there's a lot of words of advice to Timothy in this final letter as well. This is one of them. Join me in suffering. It's better to be in suffering than be on the sideways enjoying life, right? So for us, when we start to encounter difficulties, I think our Christian attitude, which is still extremely difficult for us, is to rejoice. Because the suffering is a test. It's an opportunity for us And as Chico Xavier says, right, it's better for us to be suffering than causing suffering in others. Divaldo also says the same thing, right? It's much better that someone is offending me than me offending someone, right? It's better that someone is hurting me than me hurting someone. But it's difficult. And that's why he brings this here. Francis of Assisi comes to mind, right? In terms of suffering. Another analogy that he makes, the hard-working farmer should be the first to receive a share of the crops. Talking about many of the Christians who neglect their missions in life, as Joe was saying, right? And expect a good harvest, right? We waste our times. We see how many spirits suffering when they discarnate because they simply wasted their experience. They expect a harvest of good work without moving a finger, right? And harvest at that time, farming at that time was much harder than today that we have the machines. Yeah, they used to work from, the beginning of the day until the end of the day with their bare hands and very poor instruments. It's really hard work, right? And here's his invitation for Timothy, right? Be hardworking as a farmer in your heart. In your heart. This is for all of us. Flee from, connected with the message that Maria Lucia read at the beginning, flee from the desire of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call the Lord with a pure heart. So, something very dangerous for the youth and for us who have been youth for a longer time, right? We are often called by our vices, by the things that we like, by some of the illusions of the world. It reminds us of that message from the gospel, the earthly man. We have all sorts of costumes and traditions on earth, but not necessarily we need to compactuate. We don't need to walk hand in hand with them. I think Marcio mentioned about that when he told to Corinthians last time, that everything is allowed, but not everything is the right thing to do, right? So that's the same message on the desires of youth and the desires that we all have on earth. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. And here is something so difficult for all of us Christians, or who strive to be Christians, right? We pay so much attention everywhere for the diseases of our bodies, right? About cancer, HIV, you name it. There's a lot of protocols on how to do, what not to do, wash your hands, procedures for blood transfusion, all that. But we pay so little attention to the diseases of our soul, of our spirits, that often express themselves in our bodies. That's how it works at the end of the day, right? We are only sick externally because we are sick spiritually. That's why we have no sickness in Jesus. Right? But here is, godless chatter, which is really using our words not in a Christian manner, right? Criticizing, complaining, gossiping, right? And all those things that Paul is also telling us, and Emmanuel reinforces that it's not applicable to the poor, to the weak. We should apply this as well to the rich, to the powerful. We think a lot about charity and being nice and respectful to the weak, but when we see people that are actually in power right now, and I often think about the politicians in Brazil, even here, there are corruptions everywhere. There are people using the power incorrectly everywhere, and we often try to help the poor and the weak, but those we only criticize. And we should think, what is our role as Christians? Obviously, we are not going to say, no, that politician, that corrupt politician, it's my brother, so I love everything he's doing. Of course not. But instead of criticizing more, and one thing that shocked me was on Facebook one day when someone spoke about Lula's, our president, former president, cancer. Or he got what he deserved. I said, my goodness, is that a Christian behavior, right? What we should do, we don't want to support, obviously, as Emmanuel says that very well, we don't want to support their mistakes, but they are our brothers. Let's pray for them. Let's send them good messages that maybe they will wake up spiritually and stop that trend. Our brothers from ISIS, they are killing people, right? That young man who just got into a church in North Carolina and killed a bunch of people, we just send more negative stuff. How about we start praying for him? Not only the victims, praying for him as well, right? So we use our words in a very inappropriate manner. Again, it's not easy. It's very difficult. But that's what, some of the things that Paul and Emmanuel elaborates a lot, using the chatting, the conversations in different contexts, right? This is one that I wanted to bring to our attention because it's something that we have been trying to change in ourselves, actually, right? And this is the final message, actually, to wrap up, that summarizes a lot of all that Paul brings to Timothy in all the letters, encouraging him, giving him the strength and the encouragement to pursue righteousness, to do the good things, to do the right things, to live a godly life, which doesn't mean to be a saint, right? Or to live within the Spirit center, or to wear white every day. That's not what he meant. Godly life is strive to be a Christian wherever you are. Strive to be at service to Jesus whenever you are. Right? Along with faith, love, perseverance, because we will live here today and tomorrow we are going to try and we are going to fail. And what is the expectations from Jesus? That we will feel miserable and give up? No. As he says, dust yourself, try again. And when we try again, we will fail again. And dust yourselves and try again. That's why perseverance is so key here, right? And gentleness. If we fail, it's not everyone's fault, right? It's because we are still learning. So we should be gentle with each other. But perseverance is actually one of the key things for us. If you want to take one thing home today, if you forgot already everything that I said, let's take perseverance. It's not easy to follow Jesus. It's very difficult. We already failed in numerous times. And if you want to read about it, get the book, The Messengers. It tells our story over there. But let's persevere. If you fail, let's move forward. Thank you. I hope it was a good message for you. It was for me.
Okay, so thank you so much, Marcos. It was wonderful. So now we're gonna open up for some questions and answers from Marcos or comments.
There's one thing that I just want to confirm. At the time of Paul, there was only one gospel, right? The Gospel of Matthew?
The first one, yes. For Levi, as they used to call him at the beginning. It was the first one that he actually read. But then along the way, he observed that there were many things that he would listen from others that were not there. And then he actually, and that's only Paul and Stephen actually, he asked the others to start writing. He asked John and Luke and some of the others to start writing. But that was the only one that there was at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions?
Any questions from the internet?
No?
One thing that always kind of struck me with Paul is that he always seems to be very strict, wanting people to change very quickly. And it only struck me to understand why that was the case when reading about Paul. He was convinced that Jesus was going to come back within his lifetime.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When he would come back, he would separate those who had followed the right faith versus those who would not. So he had a mission to save everyone. That's why he did all of the things he did, and he dedicated his life because he wanted to save as many as people as he could, because he realized that he only had a few years left in his life, and that if Jesus came and nobody was prepared, it would be a disaster. Now, he must have realized that Jesus was not coming back when, in his lifetime, when he was in prison. And he changes his tone in terms of really setting the foundations of, especially to Timothy, to keep the torch going, moving forward.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. When we were reading the Bible, actually, you can see through his letters, you know, how he was changing the way he was speaking and the way he was approaching people. I can't tell you how wonderful, I can't tell you enough how wonderful this book is. It's really, it's the best book I ever read after the Bible, of course. And the Spirit's book, which woke me up to be able to read this. But this book is really amazing. It's we have here at the TSS for sale. If you haven't read, please. I think we also have one at the library, just one, for the members. If you do choose to. Oh my goodness, you're so cute. You're so talkative. That's what happens when you go to Brazil. And you come back. A chatterbox. Anyway, it's really wonderful. And we also have the book, The Messengers, that Marcos mentioned. Also for sale and also for the members to, if you decided to take home. These are books that it's really worth, you know. We have a beautiful summer ahead of us. We have beautiful trees in Toronto. Take this book, go under a tree, and you're going to be blessed in ways that you have no idea. Thank you so much, Marcos. Now we're going to be opening for our healing passes.
And if you want to know who actually received Paul when he passed away, it's right at the end. Just saying.
Now you have to read. At least the end. Okay, so who is it today? Well, thank you so much for the people from the internet who followed